Europe is standing at a crossroad. We either talk the talk or we also walk the walk. Now, we all have our domestic differences and challenges in how to implement climate measures. But this cannot stand in the way of us coming together and creating a result in the end, creating a strong result, confirming Europe's role as global climate leaders. And that is what today is about. And especially in times of President Trump making statements such as the European climate measures not being of benefit to our economic growth, we need to make sure that we showcase that this is not true. And it is a European fact that climate measures has been beneficial to our economic growth and to our industries. So it's time to come together in the end, not on the specifics on how to implement climate measures, but on the fact that we are the global leaders and that we are bringing together policies that live up to the standards of the Paris Agreement. And it's now more important than ever.
Do you think this will work, that everyone will come together, not about the way how to go there, but about the fact that this is an NDC that needs to be agreed on?
I think that that's what today's meeting is about. The decisions that are to be made on a climate law, on a climate 2040 goal, is on the level of ambition, and it is on the amounts of emissions that we are to decrease. And this is, of course, intertwined with the Paris Agreement and not the specifics on how to implement the climate measures, because there we know that we have all of our different domestic challenges which are being considered and are being taken care of in the legislation itself. So today is about the level of ambition, and it's about standing ground and not only sticking to talking the talk when it is easy, but also walking the walk when it becomes difficult. And I also want to bring an optimistic message as well today, because I think that what we are seeing today is not a political backlash. It's a consequence of Europe actually implementing climate measures, of Europe actually being at the forefront of climate action globally today. That is why we are getting to the more difficult parts. We have picked the low-hanging fruits on the tree, and we are getting to the more difficult parts of climate transition, which is at the core a good thing and something that we will see more countries hopefully getting to. I will do my utmost to make sure that the text keeps its level of ambition, and for Sweden it is also extremely important that the 90% target is at the core of the climate law. We will of course also do all that we can to make sure that the climate law is integrated into our NDC. We need to not only bring an NDC to the COP meeting, we need to bring an NDC that contains new policies, new politics, that showcases Europe's progression when it comes to climate action.
Minister, some countries are really pushing to weaken the climate law. What would you say to them? I mean, what are they asking for, and what will they get today to say yes to this?
What they will get today, I mean, we'll see. We have a very strong presidency from the Danish side, and I'm hopeful that they will make sure to keep what's most important at the core of the work that needs to be done today. I think it's very important to make sure that it's not only the critical loud voices that are being heard, but also the voices of countries being constructive and working to find ways forward. And Sweden will, of course, be a part of that both pragmatic and ambitious group of countries. But our voices are just as necessary to adopt an NDC and to adopt a climate law, and this needs to be at the core if we are to have a successful outcome today.
Looking at the COP, how much of a pioneer can the European Union still be after all the disagreements and missing deadlines?
I believe that even with the lowest amount of ambition that we are seeing today, unfortunately, Europe is the strongest leader globally when it comes to implementing and adopting climate legislation and NDCs as well. And this is, of course, a sad thing in general, that even when we have our lowest level of ambitions, we're doing so well globally. And this is because we are seeing so little effort from many countries that need to do a lot more. And specifically specifically the G20 group needs to do a lot more to be able to live up to the Paris Agreement. But I think that that is also very important to keep in mind, the fact that even with the lowest ambition we could have as an outcome in our climate law, for example, we're still very much global leaders when it comes to adopting climate legislation and also implementing climate legislation. And adopting different goals with different levels of ambition, it's not the relevant part of climate work. The work that actually needs to be done of lowering emissions, it comes when you're implementing legislation, when you're actually mitigating, and that is the phase that Europe is in right now, and that is what's creating different domestic challenges that I am well assured of that we can solve. Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, a little short. We'll see how the academic quarter works in Brussels, but we'll try. One of the issues that will be discussed today is international export credits, something that also the Riks Revolution has looked at, the Swedish ones, where they state that being third has not done any good and has some critical views. What do they say about that? It is, of course, incredibly important that you have high integrity if you are to work with international export credits. And that is something that is also new, and where we constantly learn how to best shape them. A fundamental issue is that you should not be able to make double claims, that is, to be good at calculating these on several different places. And that is something that Sweden is trying to contribute to, but is not happening. At the same time, we also need to work nationally to increase the quality of the efforts that we do abroad. But basically, it is a positive thing that we go from just working with climate assistance to actually working with clean investments that contribute to building up the economy in other countries, and then letting the work roll out on the premises of the market economy. Are you talking about insecurity factors? Poor target management from the government side? No, but that is of course what we need to work on. When you bring forward new climate policy, it is not without challenges and potential for improvement that the government will, of course, look at. I will soon also have a meeting with the responsible authority from the Swedish Energy Authority to discuss how we can improve the efforts that we do from the Swedish side. But here in Brussels today, it is quite obvious that it cannot be the case that you can use loans as an excuse to decrease the level of ambition nationally. And that is something that Sweden will continue to push for, that we should have the highest possible level of ambition, and that it is actually positive for our economy when the industry gets stable rules of play that do not change all the time. If we are talking about criticism, you have received a lot of criticism for the lack of presence at the climate summit. Why don't you send a substitute, a minister, to the negotiations, and not just before the summit? I want to be very clear that Sweden has a proper delegation representing the climate summit. In addition, Your Majesty the King and the Queen, who have a very large presence on the spot, which makes an impression, will also be joined by the Minister of State, Rosenkrantz, in the introductory part. But when the technical negotiations begin, 2 different secretaries will also be present in different circumstances. Both Secretary of State Janse from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Secretary of State Dissen from the Department of Climate and Business. In addition, we have 20 different employees from authorities who work together with the chief negotiator of the delegation, Matthias Vermery, who also has extensive experience of this type of negotiations. It is so at these meetings that Sweden does not negotiate by itself, but we are the EU on the spot. And it is in the EU that we come together to agree on what the next bid will be. There I experienced that the Secretaries of State make a very big difference on the spot. Often, it is the skilled Secretaries of State who come up with the best formulations at the end of the negotiations, and not necessarily the ministers who have their function, but not always the ability to negotiate. If other countries send their ministers, why should Sweden not do it? Can't there just be a point that there is a minister on the spot during the negotiations? Of course, there is a function when a minister is on the spot. But if you are actually worried about the outcome of the negotiations, then it is very clear that the coordinations that take place within the EU, where the EU comes to an agreement on what our next bid is, there the Secretaries of State can make a very big difference, and sometimes even a bigger difference than what the ministers can do. So I do not think that one should judge the ability based on the title, so to speak. We will have a strong representation on the spot. We will have a representative for the government who will present our national leader through our Secretary of State, Lena Dissen. So I am not worried that this affects our actual impact in the negotiations and the outcome of the negotiations. But it is of course sad that I myself cannot be on the spot. And that is of course something that I would have preferred. If today's meetings, these flexibilities that you are discussing, how worried are you about them? Because it will still be a lower climate ambition. I'm probably thinking about these international loans and the risk that it could not be a possibility without a demand. It is actually a risk. We see which countries want to raise the level of loans, and that is something that we will of course monitor carefully. For us, it is important that you cannot see this timeline that we have due to the fact that the COP meeting is soon underway, as a deadline that makes us water out the legislation that we have in the EU and what we agree on in the EU. And therefore, it is important not to focus on one thing and let go of the other, but to keep two balls in the air today and make sure to negotiate with all countries to ensure that we keep as high an ambition level as possible. And also talk about the fact that it is, of course, so that we in different countries will do this in different ways. But that does not mean that we should fall on the level of ambition. If China reports that they reach their emissions peak this year, and not in 5 years, as has been expected earlier, how important is that for total work? It is invaluable. If you look at how the emissions look in total amounts, then you see what an extreme level China has. It cannot be compared with any other country. And the reason for that is also that it is crooked on every country. It says made in China on half of the products you turn on at least. And they have a very high production rate, and they have a lot of energy they consume for this, and it is often coal power. So China's decision, both on what goals they set, but also concrete decisions, such as being more interested in nuclear power, later, is something that will have an extreme impact on the entire world's ability to achieve the Paris Agreement and reduce our emissions at a rapid pace. Thank you very much.